Good evening and welcome to a special edition of Blogging Theology. And I'm very honored this evening, I say this evening here in France, it's morning in California. We have Dr. Abdullah Ali from the Zaytuna Institute. You are most welcome, sir, on Blogging Theology.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Paul.
And just for anyone who's not familiar with it's been described as a gem by one of his colleagues. I'll spare his blushes. But Dr. Abdullah Ali is a scholar of Islamic law with specialities in Islamic theology, as well as race and blackness studies in Muslim history. His research interests include the interconnection between law and identity formation, comparative Islamic law, and Islam's role in the modern world. At Zaytuna College, Dr. Ali teaches jurisprudential principles, family law, inheritance law, commercial law, prophetic tradition, creedal theology, and Islamic virtue ethics. And Dr. Ali received his MA and PhD from the Graduate Theological Union. And prior to his post at Zaytuna College, he was chaplain at the State Correctional Institute in Chester, PA, until 2007. And he's also fluent in Arabic. So it's an extremely impressive CV, if I may say so. This evening, Dr. Ali is going to be sharing with us his knowledge and insight into what's called Islamic eschatology. It's a technical term meaning the end times, what happens at the end of history, with particular reference to the role of Imam Mahdi in Muslim thought and the second coming of Jesus and the Antichrist. So this is truly a huge subject about which for me anyway, there has been some confusion about who is what and what happens. But Dr. Abdullah Ali is here to navigate us through this. And so I'll hand it over to you, sir. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. You can't speak about Imam al-Mahdi without speaking also about the Antichrist and speaking about the return of Jesus, son of Mary, peace be upon him. First and foremost, the scholars of Islam differ about the authenticity of the reports concerning Imam Mahdi. Ibn Khaldun, for instance, actually said that all of the hadith, all of the prophetic traditions about Imam Mahdi are actually weak, and so they're unreliable in his particular view. And that was the view of a few others as well. But most of the scholars historically have said that while acknowledging that many of the hadith about Imam Mahdi are weak or unreliable, that there are some which are reliable. And for this reason, you'll find that most scholars that you will encounter today, Muslim scholars you encounter today, and you mention the subject of the Mahdi, they would acknowledge that, the Mahdi is coming, that the Mahdi is real. And Imam Mahdi is his own sort of messianic figure, which is not Jesus, according to this mainstream understanding, who will come towards the end of time to restore justice after tyranny has spread throughout the world. He's a end of times or eschatological figure. And the reason I mentioned before that we can't speak about the Mahdi without speaking about the Antichrist and the Messiah is because Christians, Jews, and Muslims all believe that a Messiah shall come towards the end of time. Of course, Christians and Muslims believe that the Messiah will be Jesus. At least most Muslims believe in the return of Jesus. There are some Muslims who don't believe in the return of Jesus, but most of the Muslims do believe that. And then the Jews believe in a different Messiah who would not be Jesus. So there is consensus among what we call the Abrahamic traditions that a Messiah is supposed to come towards the end of time. Of course, there may be some variance between the different groups on the purpose of the Messiah. But for the most part, I think we can say that the ultimate goal is to restore a certain type of justice. And you can perhaps even say a type of utopia, right? Which even though it will be temporary, is expected to be restored during that time. There is an opinion that says that the Mahdi is Jesus, son of Mary himself, right? This is an opinion that does exist even among Muslim circles. And actually there's a hadith and an unreliable tradition which says, La Mahdiya illa Isa ibn Maryam, that there's no Mahdi other than Jesus, son of Mary. And the more reliable hadith collections do not include mention of the Mahdi, even though the Mahdi is mentioned in many of the less reliable collections. And for that reason, many of our scholars have embraced this understanding. The Mahdi is said to be in charge of the Muslim military forces, or leading the fight, right, of the Muslims against the unbelieving forces who will be predominant towards the end of time. And he also will be waiting along with his people for the return of Jesus, who will be responsible for the death of the Antichrist. The others will be following the Antichrist. And so naturally, this is a story about a spiritual war, right, between demonic and angelic forces, or between the forces of good and the forces of evil. One of these sort of classic themes that we find throughout human history. Yeah. So with respect to the Mahdi, the one particular story that's said about the Mahdi is said that he will flee to Mecca because of something that happens in Medina. He will flee to Mecca, and once he reaches Mecca, a number of the people will come out to him and give him allegiance. You know, it is said that the Mahdi is among the progeny of the Prophet Muhammad, in particular from his daughter Fatima, and from his son Al-Hassan, through the line of Hassan ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib. May Allah be pleased with all of them. And he will appear there, and many people will recognize him, and they'll come out and they'll give him allegiance. And once he's given allegiance, there it will be an army in the Levant, in Sham or in Syria, who will come in his direction to destroy him. While on the way to meet him and to destroy him, the earth will swallow them up. Upon witnessing this, many of the other surrounding tribes and surrounding nations will recognize at that moment that this particular man is someone special and is the awaited Mahdi. So they will come to also give him allegiance. And you know, this particular story, it exists in the Hadith literature. It's not very strong in terms of his attribution to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, you know, but it does exist there. You know, and this is part of the beliefs with respect to Imam al-Mahdi.
That's how. Can I just ask? You mentioned about the Hadith collections. Do these narrations about the Mahdi and the Jesus and so on, are they found in Bukhari and Muslim, the two preeminent collections?
No, you don't find specific mention of the Mahdi in either Bukhari and Muslim, but you will find it mentioned in Abu Dawood and Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, some of the lesser collections. Abu Dawood has a specific chapter called Kitab al-Mahdi, the Book of the Mahdi. So it's not mentioned in, of course, Bukhari and Muslim, and not expressly, but there's mention in Bukhari and Muslim, or at least in the Muslim collection, a particular imam who will be present when Jesus, son of Mary, appears, and Jesus will be offered the opportunity to lead the congregation in prayer. But then Jesus, he will decline and say, no, that this is an honor to your nation that you are to lead us in prayer. But it doesn't mention specifically the Mahdi, but often that particular hadith is utilized as something that suggests the Imam Mahdi in the more authentic way.
The Imam in that in Muslim hadith is understood to be Imam Mahdi, even though it's not explicitly. So there is some connection there, but it's in the canonical hadith, even though it's not in the gold standard, if that's the right expression.
Right, exactly. Right, it does. Right.
Does the word Mahdi, is it like a proper noun like Smith or Jones, or does it have some kind of etymological significance?
Well, yeah, the Mahdi is, we can call a passive participle, right? Meaning rightly guided, right? One who has been given guidance. So
it's more a title than a name. Do you know what I mean? Is it more of a title? Like the Messiah itself is, in its proper understanding, a title, rather than it's become a surname, like Jesus Christ, the surname. But is it a title or is it a name? I'm confused.
Yes, it's a title. The Mahdi is a title, right? It is a title, right? And for that reason, there have been multiple people historically who have claimed that the mantle of the Mahdi. Going back to the early Abbasid period, one of the rulers among the Abbasids, Al-Mahdi himself, some claim that he was the Mahdi. We find it in 19th century as well in Sudan. Muhammad ibn Ahmad al-Mahdi, and also it was attributed to Ghulam Ahmad, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad. Also, there's a claim that he was the Mahdi, and also Ahmed Brailwi, the Brailvi, founder of the Brailvi sect or faction of Muslims, from the subcontinent as well, right? So you find multiple claims of this throughout history. But the hadith says that the individual will be from the family of the Prophet, from his daughter Fatima, and in particular from the progeny of Hassan, and his name will reflect or mirror the name of the Prophet. It would be Muhammad ibn Abdullah, Muhammad the son of Abdullah, as the Prophet himself.
So he's got to have the right lineage, he's got to have the right name. Yes. And okay, that kind of narrows the field a bit. But in terms of the general situation when the Mahdi is expected to come, you said early on, I think, that the condition of the world is one of great evil and great tribulation. And so, and I'm sticking my neck out here, but does that characterize the world today, or is that something that we have still yet to look forward to? If that's the right word.
Well, I mean, there are definitely some concerning, very concerning issues, things that are happening today, and it makes you believe that we may be nearing that time. Of course, people have been talking about this for a very long time, that the end of days is near. Many people have attempted to predict this, but when we look at our own tradition, Islamic tradition, in particular, if we focus on the Antichrist, the narrations related to the Antichrist. Now, the narrations about the Antichrist and about the return of Jesus and son of Mary are much stronger than the hadith about the Mahdi, even to the extent of having canonical status. The hadith of the return of Jesus and the Mahdi, and the Antichrist, of Jesus and the Antichrist, because you see, the Mahdi is connected with fighting under of course, the leadership of Jesus, and or just simply leading the Muslim armies against the armies of the Antichrist. And it is stated in the hadith that prior to the rise of the Antichrist, that there will be 3 years of great tribulation upon the earth. It says that God will command the earth not to reduce its vegetation by 1/3 in the first year. Mm-hmm. And command the sky to reduce its water by 1/3 in the first year. In the second year, it will be 2/3 for each. Reduction in crops and reduction in water. And then the third year, there will be a complete reduction. There will be no water, no rain, and there will be no produce. Animals will die, and there will, of course, be a lot of suffering. At this moment is when the Antichrist will appear. Mm-hmm. And he will appear, and he will be the greatest test that humanity has ever witnessed. And this is what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said in the sound hadith, where he says that between the creation of Adam and the end of days, or the judgment day, there's no affair greater than the fitna, or the test of the Antichrist, right? And he said that every single prophet before him had warned his people about the Antichrist.
So what is there to warn about? Is it that he would appear in some mysterious way to be an attractive figure, a figure that people should follow and deceive people? Is that the concern?
Yes, exactly.
Transparently evil. He will be someone who will be a figure worthy of following and deceive even Muslims, perhaps.
Right. Yeah, indeed. He will be someone who will be attractive. He will first appear as a head of state, claim, just simply someone who's ruling the population, and then he will claim to be the messenger of God, and then he will eventually claim to be God. But because of the suffering that exists in the world, he will have wide appeal, and he have the power to actually to give command to the earth, and it grows vegetation, and give command to the sky, and it will rain. It says that he will visit every single town, right, with the exception of Mecca and Medina, because those two towns will be protected by the angels, would not allow him to enter into those two towns, those cities, and so he will go to a town and he will demand belief from the individuals in that particular town or that city. And those who don't believe, their all of their belongings will be taken from them. Their crops will die. Their animals will die, and he will walk away. Right, and then other towns he will go to, and he will demand from them to believe in him as well. And when they believe, their crops will begin to grow, and their animals will become fat. All right, and they will have abundant rain. So in this sense, he will appear to be a true Christ, a true Messiah, right? One given miraculous power. And for this reason, he is a great fitna. And so the prophet actually said that if you hear of the Antichrist, then keep your distance, because a person will come to the Antichrist for one particular reason and will believe that the Antichrist is actually telling the truth to that person because of the many tactics and gifts that individual has of deception and persuasion.
But if I can just ask that, if he is doing these amazing miracles, in other words, he's providing evidence of his great power,
right,
how would we know that he is false? I mean, how would we not be deceived by him? He seems a very, given that the earth is in such severe evil at the time, he is a redeemer in a way. Why wouldn't we follow him? How would we know that he was so evil?
Right. Well, that's what's interesting about the prophet's statement, in that he said, okay, every single prophet before me had warned about him. He said, but I'm going to tell you something that no other prophet told you about him. He said that he is blind in one eye, and in the letters Kaf, Fa, Ra are written between his eyes. And so it is said that what's meant by him being blind in one eye is that this is apparent, a physical defect in him, that his right eye in particular, according to most hadiths, says his right eye. Some hadiths mention the left eye, but most of them say the right eye will be affected by a type of a skin, we're covered with a skin, which is indicative of him lacking light from that eye, or some hadith said it will be like a protruding grape. But there will be physical defects in this individual, which will indicate that. And the letters kafara, which spell out kafir or unbeliever, will be written between his two eyes. And so the prophet said, يَقْرَأُهُ كُلُّ مُؤْمِنٍ كَاتِبٍ وَغَيْرِ كَاتِبٍ, that every believer, whether or not he can read, will be able to see it. In other words, iman or faith will be one of the ways that we'll know that this is the Antichrist. If you don't have strong faith, then of course you will be easily deceived by this. And then also the prophet said, that know that your Lord is not one-eyed. So he would claim to be God, so he said, no, in other words, notice your Lord does not have imperfections, right? That's really what the idea is, that your Lord is not imperfect, and this is an imperfect creature, right? So we've been given indications of how to identify the Antichrist, but also we've been given ammunition on how to defend ourselves against the Antichrist if we ever are encounter the Antichrist.
And how do we defend ourselves should this eventuality come to pass in our lifetimes?
So the Prophet told us that we should recite the first 10 verses of Surah Al-Kahf, which is the 18th chapter of the Quran. Some hadiths say the last 10 verses of Surah Al-Kahf. There actually is another hadith that says the first 3 verses of Surah Al-Kahf. So that's one way to defend ourselves from the Antichrist. In other words, it doesn't mean that we necessarily defend ourselves physically from the Antichrist and the minions of the Antichrist, but we're defending our spirits, our souls from the Antichrist by doing this, because that's what's most important, as we all know, is the state of the soul.
Mm-hmm. So Jesus returns, as you say, and he returns and joins the Mahdi in this cosmic apocalyptic battle against the Antichrist. And what's the nature of this war? Is it a physical war? Is it that you could see you physically observe? And what is the outcome of this extraordinary clash?
It is. It is definitely it's a physical war that will occur between the forces. And the important thing about Jesus coming, alayhi salam, peace be upon him, is that the weapons, he himself is the ultimate weapon against the armies of the Antichrist. Right, the Muslims themselves will actually be fleeing. They would be in retreat. They would be in hiding. And then Jesus will appear. He said, "The matter will appear." And once the Antichrist sees him, that he will begin to melt. Like it says in the Hadith, says he will begin to melt as salt dissolves or in water, and any unbelievers within the eyesight of Jesus, son of Mary, will also this will happen to them as well, that they will die immediately. And so as he's melting, Jesus will come and have a spear, and he will kill the Antichrist with his spear. So it actually is a physical fight, actually a true physical fight, which will be ongoing until the appearance of Jesus, son of Mary, and then that will, of course, be the end of that particular fight. But then there will be other occurrences after that, prior to the end of our days on this earth.
So after this battle successfully be concluded, the Antichrist is destroyed. Isa is, I understand, perhaps buried next to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon them both, in Medina. Is that right?
Yes, right. Yeah, there are reports of this, and this was what will occur. Exactly, right. So, but Jesus, it says that Jesus will remain on the earth for about 40 years after this. He will marry, he'll have children, and then eventually he will die. Right. And so, according to most Muslims, Jesus still has not died. And so God now gives him a natural death at this particular point, and also gives him the opportunity to live as somewhat of a normal man, I guess you would say. But during this time, there will be many other things happening on the earth. But once he does die, the Hadith says that he will be placed in a grave next to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
But one of the attending events, I don't know if this is reliable or not, that I've heard would accompany Isa's activity on earth is breaking the cross and killing the pig. Obviously, these are kind of brief ways of expressing a much more complex reality. What do those two terms mean, do you think?
Right. Yeah. So it says that, yeah, because his return, during his return, he could have all crosses broken, and will kill pigs, and also it says that he will exempt people from having to pay the jizya, or the tribute that is extracted from non-Muslim citizens, and so I think it's literal. I mean, there's more. It's been taken historically to be a literal breaking, right? Or a sign in that Jesus has come to redeem himself, right, and to redeem his reputation as well,
right?
And so it is to clarify to Christians that he's not God, that he's not the Son of God, as they believe, but also to rule according to the Sharia of Muhammad, the divine moral code of Muhammad, peace be upon him, which forbids the consumption of pork. And so for that reason, he's been given permission by God to actually have pigs killed, so that no one would ever indulge in that once again. And the issue of removing the tribute, it is said that the reason for this is because at this particular moment, a person no longer has a choice with respect to what particular path they must choose, right? The only pathway is to believe in God and believe in his messenger, Muhammad, in this particular, and also to believe in Jesus, son of Mary, right?
Right. So there'd be no more, in a sense, there'd be no more Christians then. There couldn't be, because the matter has been cleared up definitively, finally, by Jesus himself.
Yes.
And very much vindicating the Islamic position, I see.
Right, exactly. Right.
So he ultimately passes away and is buried, as we say. And what happens after that? What period of history, if any, continues after that?
Yeah, what happens after this, and during his life, it is said, there's a story in Surah 18 about the Ya'juj and Ma'juj, Dhul Qarnayn, the Gog and Magog people, right, who apparently have been trapped in some sort of invisible barrier, right, that God has, or perhaps a different dimension of God's, and that they have been trapped there and have been given a very long life, right, and attempting to escape from that barrier, right, and so God will set them loose upon the earth at this point. And they will, no one will be able to resist them. They will be an overwhelming force. They will kill everything in their path. They wreak havoc upon the earth until eventually, because of the prayers of the Muslims, the prayers of Jesus, that God will destroy them with some type of pathogen. The hadith mentioned that they will get what's called naghafa, which is a type of worms which will be trapped in their necks and attack them and sell them that way. And
is this a race of people? Is it a group of people, or what could we expect that they will? How they constitute themselves?
Well, if you read the Surah Al-Kahf, Surah 18 gives the impression that we're talking about a race of people. Right? There's a certain race of people, in the sense, in the old sense of race, right? Not in the contemporary sense of race. Because when we think of race today, we think of like biological homogeneity, things like that, But in the pre-modern period, we're talking about what I like to call cultural races, which is not necessarily identified by color, but rather by shared culture and language, history, things like that.
Ethnicity, kind of more than biological. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Ethnicity. Right.
Right. So these people will wreak havoc, and then they will be brought to heel by this infection, this biological
infection. Right. Will destroy them, and then yes, and then eventually what happens is that God, the hadith says that God will send a sort of, we can call it a blessed wind across the earth, right? And this wind will take the lives of all of the believing people remaining on the earth. Now, okay, let me backtrack, for a second, So there's also mention of what's called the beast and dabba, which is mentioned in the Quran itself, that God will send a beast out into the earth who will speak to humanity. He will come out, and his job, according to the dominant understanding, is that he will place a label on every individual on the planet. He will make it clear, stamp everyone, or brand everyone, believer, non-believer, believer, non-believer. Everyone will have their own stamp, and they will be known through the beast coming forth and speaking to them and addressing them with regard to their obligations. faith obligations, and then eventually he will disappear, apparently, and then God will send a wind which will take the souls of all the believers, remaining believers on the earth. And this sort of sounds like this idea of rapture.
I was just going to say exactly that. We see that in the New Testament. I was just going to say that. Paul in Thessalonians refers to a similar sounding event.
Right. Right. And so all of the believing souls will be taken from the earth, and only the scoundrels will remain, and the riffraff and the degenerate people remain on the earth after this. And it says that things will be so bad that they will interact in the same way that wild animals do. That if men will be having sex in presence of other men out in public, and other people out in public, et cetera, et cetera. And then eventually the sun will rise from the west, right, rather than from the east. And at that point, it says no persons who professes faith at that point will have that confession or profession accepted from them, who did not already accept faith or earn any good prior to that, right? So in other words, that the doors close at that moment. That once you see the sun rising from the west, even if you say I believe now, I say no, it's too late. It doesn't really matter.
Pharaoh, isn't it, who said at the very last second,
Right, exactly. Right. Once you saw that it was inevitable.
It's a bit late for that now.
Right.
Okay. Well, what happens? I mean, what happens then? So we have this quasi rapture. We have this cosmic alteration between east and west. And what's the final stage?
Well, the final stage is what we usually say is the blowing of the horn, right? And there's also mention, prior to that, with something called dukhan, the smoke. In other words, the earth is supposed to be enveloped with a certain type of smoke. It's unclear exactly what that's a reference to, at least from my understanding. I'm not really clear exactly what that will be. It could be literally the smoke, which covers the earth, which is also one of the signs, or the major signs, of the end of time. But once the final moment comes, there will be a blowing of the horn, nafkha fasuri, and so there's supposed to be 3 blows happening. That the first one will be to take the lives. One is to cause alarm, place a shock into the hearts of everyone on the planet. A very large clamor will happen, a blowing of a horn, and then the second one will take the lives of those remaining on the planet, and then the third blow will be for the resurrection. Right? Once it's blown the third time, everyone will be resurrected.
This idea of blowing a horn or blowing a trumpet it's there in the other Abrahamic faiths as well. It's certainly there in Christianity and some strands of Judaism as well. So this is very familiar. If any Christians are hearing this, will recognize a lot of this.
Great. Yeah. I wanted to bring up another thing with respect to the Antichrist, and I think it's extremely important to point out, because you had asked at the very beginning about the times wherein we live at the moment. There's a hadith, is a sound hadith, is reported in the Sahih of Imam Muslim from a woman, a companion known as Fatima bint Qais Fihriya. And so she talks about, in this particular hadith, how she was completing her waiting period from a divorce. And once she had completed the waiting period of divorce, she came out to the mosque of the Prophet and found that the Prophet was there, gathered with the men. She prayed behind the men, and at the conclusion of the prayer, the Prophet had told everyone to remain seated. He told them not to go anywhere. Then he said, the reason that I've told you this, to remain seated, is because I was recently told a story by Tamim ad-Dari. Now, Tamim ad-Dari was a former Arab Christian, right, who accepted Islam around probably about 2 years prior to the death of the Prophet Muhammad. He became Muslim, and so he told the Prophet of a story. And this particular story, it included himself and a group of about 30 other men who were on a ship. They were at sea, and then a great storm came. while they're at sea, they lost their way. They couldn't gain control of the vessel, and then eventually they found themselves shipwrecked on a small island, right, in the sea. When they started to search, they encountered a creature which was referred to as a jassasa, which was a creature was covered in hair, or another had long strands of hair covering its body. You could not tell the front from the backside of it, and I think the assumption was that it was a female. And this creature told them to come with her, come with it, to meet a particular man who was inside of a monastery. When they came into that monastery, they found this man, a very large man, who was in shackles, was being, restrained excessively, restrained, and they spoke of course, the way that the man looked. He, looked this one eye was imperfect compared to the other, and this man began to speak and question them. So he asked them who they were. And they said that we are Arabs from the peninsula, and we were shipwrecked, and we found ourselves here, and then we encountered this creature and told us and brought us to you. And so the Dajjal, this is the Masih Dajjal, the Antichrist. He asked him. He says, has the prophet of the Arabs appeared? And so they said, yes, he has. And it says, and has he fought his people? And he said, yes, he fought his people. And they said, what happened? He said, well, he was victorious over his people. And so he said to them, this is good news. Very soon I will be set loose upon this earth. And then he also asked them some other questions. He said, what is the state of the waters of the Tiberias, the Lake of Tiberias? The Lake of Tiberias is the Sea of Galilee. And so they said that its waters are flourishing. They're as normal. There's nothing wrong with their waters. And he said, soon, very soon, those waters will dry up. Those waters will dry up. And what's interesting about this is that if you were to search today, you'll see that the Sea of Galilee, the waters have been receding, right, for a very long time, for a number of years. Right, and it's become a crisis. As a matter of fact, Jordan has a part of the treaty, the peace treaty between Jordan and Israel, is that the Israelis will provide the Jordanians with a certain amount of fresh water, because the Sea of Galilee is fresh water, lake or sea, so the Israelis have actually had to adopt some special technology to import desalinated water into the Sea of Galilee to keep it, I guess you'd say, somewhat viable, right? But everyone is acknowledging that the Sea of Galilee, the waters are receding, that the water is drying up. He also said to them, he said, what about what is called the spring of Zugar, Ain al-Zugar, right? Which today is called Ain al-Sultan, right? Which is in Ariha, right, in Ain Sultan. And he said, what about the waters of that spring? And they said, oh, the waters of the spring are flourishing. The water's plenty. And so he also told them that the waters will dry up there very soon, right? And so if you also do a search about the waters of Zugar, that you may, and about Ain Sultan, you may notice that the waters actually appear, at least to me, to be drying up. And then the third thing he asked him about, or probably the fourth thing, after asking about the prophet, peace be upon him, he said, and what about the dates, the date palms of Baysan? Baysan is the town known as Beit Shi'an. Beit Shi'an is also called Baysan, right? And so he asked him about the date palms of Baysan, if they were still growing, if they're still producing fruit. And so they said, yes, they're producing fruit. So he says, well, eventually their fruits will no longer, these trees will no longer produce fruit. And now, of course, this will require some further investigation. But if you actually look up the Beit Shi'an and its economy, and what its economy is based upon, you'll find that it says that it is a cotton-based economy. It's no mention of the exports of dates. So I don't know if that means that the date palm trees are no longer producing anything, or if they ever were a major part of the economy of that particular town. At any rate, I'm saying, so there's some very concerning things that come out of that hadith, and so he told them that once these things occurred, I shall be released, and I will be set loose from the world, and I will tarry in this world for 40 days. One day will be like a year, one day will be like a month, one day will be like a Friday, and the remaining days will be like your days, which, of course, if you take that literally, it's about 1 year, I think about two months, about 1 year, 2 months or so, right? So it's very concerning issues. And then we also must consider the fact that the prophet also, he spoke about the conditions that will be, that will precede the appearance, the conditions in the world that will precede the appearance of the Antichrist. So, for instance, he talked about prior to the appearance of the Antichrist, there will be what he calls sanawat khadda'a or sinun khadda'a, deceptive years. Yukaddabu fiha as-sadiq, that the honest person will be deemed to be dishonest, and the dishonest person will be deemed to be honest. The yu'tamanu fiha al-kha'in, yukhawwanu fiha al-amin, that the trustworthy person will be deemed to be untrustworthy, and the treacherous people or the untrustworthy people will be trusted, right? And he says something about what called the Ruwaybida will speak during these times. And he says, well, what is this Ruwaybida? And he said that these are individuals or insignificant people who actually speak about the affairs of the masses. And so there are many different things when we reflect upon our current time, which give great concern that that particular end that is spoken about in these hadiths is actually very near.
Can I just ask? That's very, very interesting and very helpful. Thank you for that. Very clear, actually. I'm going to put this diplomatically for reasons that would be obvious, but are there any hadith that speak about that time, that this, which refer to, shall we say, issues of alternative sexualities and alternative lifestyles and promotion of certain practices as part of that stage? Is that part of this epoch, shall we say?
Right, exactly. Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is among the things that the prophet predicted would occur prior to the hour, and among the signs of the hour. Where men will find it sufficient to be with men, and women will find sufficient to be with women, and that's just a euphemism, right, for sexuality, and that
that is meant to be a euphemism, and not just some kind of. That is a euphemism.
Yes, euphemism, right? Yeah, because it's stepping out, to be. It's a euphemism, but it means, excuse me, that they will, right, sexual interaction between those particular peoples.
Right. So the practice and the prevalence of that is one of the signs of the coming. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Any other that speak to the current promotion?
Well, yeah, there are many different things. I think that many of the statements of the prophet are broad enough for us to see the truthfulness of it, right? And we reflect upon just the matter of deception overall, right? I mean, he talked about one of the signs of the hour is the prevalence of the pen, Zuhur al-Qalam, right? The prevalence of the pen, which could mean mass media, it could mean mass literacy. And not necessarily that is a negative thing. Many of the things that are signs of the hour are not necessarily bad things, but there are a change from the past, right? Definitely a change from the past. He talked about how an individual would leave his home and his thigh or his belt will tell him what his family did in his absence, right? Some say it is a reference to like, beepers or telephones or etc.
Yes, this sounds
right.
familiar.
Yeah. We live under, especially when we consider 2020, which to me was really 2020, and a lot of, both physically and literally and figuratively, that it was 2020, at least for me, that the level of tyranny and the capacity of governments to actually monitor, control, and manipulate their populations is at a point where it's never been in human history. Right. Individuals are not even able to distinguish between what is real and what is fake anymore. This is a time of the deep fake, artificial intelligence, mass censoring. You get labeled. You actually say something is true and you get labeled on social media, right? This false information. What's false is the label, right? And the prophet talked about that, how the truthful person will be classified as a liar, and the liar will be deemed to be truthful. And people put their trust in social media or corporations like Facebook and YouTube or Twitter, right? It must be true coming from them because they are official, right? But individuals who actually may be experts, you have doctors who've been banned from speaking certain things that are truthful, alternative remedies to the treatment of the current virus, right? Has been sort of censored or flagged as false information. So there's really that he talked about as well. The things that the spread of indecency, of vulgarity, of drinking of wine, the spread of, we call the qainat, or the songstresses, right? The singing women. You find like women, there are many, a lot of women sing, female singers, and that's not to say that they're evil, right? But it's, again, as I said, that some things are be a sign of the hour, are not necessarily indicative that that particular thing is evil, but it is just simply a change from the norms that were existent in the past, and perhaps for most of human history. Right.
Well, what about the sense that what we're told today, with ever-increasing volume by corporations and governments and news media, that there's no male and female anymore, that we're all gender is purely a social construct, and that a man can dress as a woman or vice versa, and all this is perfectly good and acceptable, and our children should be encouraged to change their gender if they feel like they're the opposite sex one day. And is there anything in the hadith or the records about these kinds of practices?
Well, I mean, specifically about this, nothing comes to me. I mean, other than the fact that, again, the prophet said that that men will be with men and women will be with women. Right. He forbade cross-dressing. He forbade men from taking on the mannerisms of women and women from taking on the mannerisms of men. In other words, that there is a connection between biology and culture. Right? It's not a simple split. This is biological and that's cultural. That there is a certain bare minimum amount which is biological, even with respect to culture. Right? At least in the view of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and of course, most of human history, that's the way that we've sort of seen things. But these definitely are, I guess you would say that these are products of a satanic order, right? There's the famous hadith that says, well, it may not be famous to you, but for many of us, we've heard it before. But this particular hadith, it talks about how Satan, he places his throne over the waters, and then he dispatches his minions from that particular location. And those who are closest to him are those who are the most harmful, right, to people, right? They're most effective in actually bringing harm upon people, right? So for instance, one of the jinn or of his minions will come to him and they will say, today I made a guy slip and fall, for instance. And he said, oh, you've done nothing, and so, but then another one will come eventually and say, well, today I was able to split up this man from his wife. I was able to destroy this family. And then that particular man is the one that Shaitan or Satan will bring close to him and actually praise him and say, yeah, you deserve to be close to me. As if to say that Satan is most happy when he's able to break up family. And the family, and of course, the nuclear family, but even greater than that, of course, the human family. So what a better way to do it than to redefine the human being, because this is fundamentally what's happening. So I've told people this multiple times before when we start talking about the issue of gender pronouns, that this is not only a threat to free speech when you're being expected to or it's being required of you to refer to individuals about whom you're speaking, right, and with a particular pronoun, right, that they prefer, not you, right, even if they are absent, right, that is not only about free speech. This is about trying to rewire the human brain. This is about trying to redefine the human being. It is a threat to science itself.
Yes.
Right. It is a threat to free speech, to freedom of conscience, and also to science itself, which really is a threat to reality.
I actually agree with you, Doctor. As a slightly more personal thing, I'm not going to mention any names here. I happen to know a doctor somewhere who is a Muslim living in the West. He's a very bright man, a very honorable man. He's got a young family. He's an intensely devout Muslim, but in a very balanced way. He's a good role model to his children, his young children. He's got a couple of young children, and his wife. Now, I mention it because he and I privately talk about precisely these matters, and the way he can't speak out publicly about his concerns to do with precisely these issues, and that he is required, as you say, by the medical association and by society to speak in certain ways which he thinks are harmful actually to the health and well-being of people. But the latest ideology says he must do it. He could lose his job. I mean, it really is an existential issue for him. It's not a nice thing here. This is he has to toe the line, or he could be called out and lose his job. And this affects all doctors, not just him, of course. But he's a particularly conscientious Muslim, and so we talk about this privately, and he expresses his anxieties, frustrations, and anger, actually, the way he has to speak to his patients sometimes who come to him. Well, I won't go into the details, but there's some things he must say to them which he knows aren't right, but he is obliged to because of the way the law is. And what are Muslims like that to do? Because I mean, on the one hand, traditionally, you do Hijra. You leave the West, leave Britain. Right. Well, okay. Well, he's born in Britain, actually. He's a UK guy. He has no connections with any particular other. I mean, it's a very dangerous situation he finds himself, and all I can think of is to say is encourage him to bring up his children in good values, introduce traditional Muslim values, but then they go to schools and then they're being brainwashed in the predictable ideologies from a very young age. So he can't protect them completely. He is at the mercy of benign educational and medical authorities who are forming his children in ways which he knows are harmful to some extent. It's a really nasty situation for people to be in, I think. And in a free society, a society that's supposed to be mature and civilized, we shouldn't be treating our people like this and our doctors forcing them into these acutely difficult situations, and their families as well. Anyway, I just wanted to get that off my chest, but this is not just a theoretical eschatological question. This is affecting real people here and now, both in Britain and doubtless in the United States as well, and in France, wherever they are people of goodwill and good moral character, who Muslims or traditional Christians perhaps, or people of other faiths, not just Muslims, of course.
Yeah, no, I agree. I totally agree with that. And there multiple times people have contacted me privately, and they've told me, I love your posts that go on social media, but I don't like, nor do I share them because I'm afraid that I might get fired or I might not get a promotion. Just things like that. I mean, so I totally understand, the concerns. I mean, I've spoken to Muslim psychologists who've actually, risked their jobs, to not have to reaffirm people as, whatever sort of gender that they supposedly belong to, or to affirm a homosexual relationship. Those type of things were encouraged and tell them that these are good things. So yeah, it's a major challenge, and I'm not sure if the U.S. is actually better than the UK. It sounds like sometimes when I hear people speak about the UK, it sounds like the UK may be in a much more difficult situation than we are in the US, because at least my understanding, and I could be wrong, of course you can correct me, that you can't just simply opt out of the public schooling. You can't say, I'm not going to take my children to public school. Is that true, or is just something?
I don't know. I thought that was. I think that may be an option, but I just way out.
Okay, no, maybe.
What I had heard though, Dr. Ali, was that the government were closing the loop in as much as judicial-minded people were availing themselves of this option, and then the government saying, no, we want you to teach the right things, actually, even if you do homeschool them, and so even that avenue has been compromised in some way, but I would need to double check that.
Well, at least at home, even if you're teaching your children at home certain things that the government requires for you to teach them, at least you can, they're not there. They're not being indoctrinated in the same way that they would be indoctrinated in the actual public school system, right? True. So you can tell them, I say, yeah, what you're going to learn is you just need to pass. You need to do the work so you can pass your grade. But we don't believe this, and this is why. So like where if you send them to the school, and with all these other children as well who are being indoctrinated into these ideas, and so there's an excessive, extreme amount of pressure upon them to do that. So definitely homeschooling is an important option. Hijra, or immigration also is an important option. I've told people recently about the U.S. The thing that's good about the U.S. is that each state in the United States is like its own country, right? So say if I feel that California is unbearable, then I can move to Texas, move to a Republican state, for instance, where I'll have more freedom, right, in a Republican state. And unfortunately, Muslim politicians in the U.S. And many of the Muslim activists, at least the more popular Muslim activists, are they're reinforcing or normalizing a lot of these ideas.
This is what I've heard. I mean, from this side of the pond, well, I'm in France, but it's the same kind of dynamic. I get the impression that many of the leaders of the Islamic activists, without mentioning names, I don't mean at Zaytuna, of course, at all, but in other places, are affirming the latest agendas, LGBT agendas and gay marriage and all of that, in a very strident ways, whilst wearing a hijab and whilst sticking up for Palestinians at the same time. So cognitively, it's quite confusing. You think this looks like a Muslim, they're pro-Palestinian, and yet she is advocating for this, and this, which is clearly against Islam. And wow, I mean, how is this? It's a very naive question, but I don't know how is this possible? Why are these people doing this? Why aren't they just speaking the truth? Why are they? Is it a desire to be accepted by the mainstream United States and be received into the institutions of power and office? Is that the temptation, or?
I think that's part of it. I think I definitely believe that the main driving force behind it is power, is the pursuit of power. Right. And there's an ideology, a popular ideology among the activists and political class in the U.S., which is basically fundamentally to say that the ends justify the means, right? And so. But of course, it's difficult to understand what the ends are, right? But it does at times it seems that the only end that they have in mind is the freedom of Palestine, right? Liberate Palestine, and if anyone who will support us in that particular goal, then we will remain silent about their problems, right? Because they support us, and so we'll support them and even be advocates for them, right? And that itself is extremely problematic. And what it does is it demoralizes young Muslims with respect to Islam. It doesn't give much hope for a future for Islam among many of our children. However, I'm not convinced myself personally that these particular ideas are predominant among the masses of Muslims, at least those who go to the mosque, right? Yeah. My experience has been something different. I think that many Muslims are just simply afraid to speak up, like we talked about before, afraid to say something. They are confused about how to actually address these issues. Yeah. And so the argument that has been given to them is that, okay, well, we live in a secular country, and so we should be in favor of secular society. So any right that any person is given in a secular society, we should support it. And so that makes sense to a lot of Muslims, but they're not understanding that how it compromises their own convictions, and it causes a lot of confusion.
I won't mention his name because he's said this publicly. I think Professor Jonathan Brown of Georgetown University has come up as perhaps something that sounds a bit similar to that we should support gay rights and so on because it's a kind of quid pro quo. We they'll support us and we live in a secular society. It's an interesting logic and a controversial one.
Right, yeah, and Dr. Brown, he's a friend of mine. Yeah, I mean, he's a friend of mine, and I've disagreed with him on that publicly. And others have disagreed with him on that publicly, and I think that it was personally very short-sighted, and we're seeing the results of that particular opinion like that. But his opinion, of course, is less extreme than some of the other people. Right? No, he's not saying he's responsible for this, right? Yeah.
Yeah, he's not saying that gay marriage is okay, anything like that.
Right, so exactly. He's very clear about that.
He's very, very clear about that. It's more a strategic option rather than a moral one. But nevertheless, it does raise eyebrows. So I was going to ask you something. I forgot what it was now. But so in terms of Hijra, so we kind of raised that, but then, and you sort of said, well, internally in the United States, it's a federation of states, so almost like not independent, but separate countries. So you can move. But if you're in Europe and, I don't know, the options are kind of less obvious, perhaps. If you're a French Muslim, I mean, you're not where you're going to go. It's not,
right. Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty much the same up and down the country, really, and ditto probably most places. I mean, is there a naive question about? Is there any Muslim country, properly so called, that is a good place to do Hijra to, or is it?
Well, I think that every place has its problems. Like, for instance, I studied in Morocco, and I like Morocco a lot. Right. The only problems that I have with Morocco are that their health system to me doesn't seem to be supportive of individuals who lack the means to actually take care of themselves properly. Right.
I've heard exactly that point. So I was speaking to someone the other day who knows that country, and that was the one point he mentioned. It's funny you should say exactly the same thing.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And and my wife's she's from Morocco, and so she tells me once these things were revealed to me, she says, "Well, are you sure you still want to move to Morocco?" Because I was thinking about perhaps that.
I see. Yeah. So it's basically you're saying you've got to weigh up inevitably the pros and cons, both in the West and living in other countries where you may have this much more healthy halal environment, but nevertheless there are other problems. I mean, health matters. Having a good doctor, access to a good hospital matters. It's not a
I totally. And then the other part too, I think that when things fall apart, I think that Western countries probably will be worse off morally, once things fall apart. But Western countries also are in the position, they have the technology and the industry to recover faster, right, than a lot of other places too, right? So I don't know. I mean, at times it's like, well, maybe don't make Hijra. Other times it's like, well, yeah, make Hijra, maybe short term, or it's really difficult to really know what to do. But right now, my thinking about the issue has been, well, the U.S. is very large, a very large place, and every state has its own culture, and the fact that we do have, at least two parties, right? The dominant parties, political parties, and there are some clear distinctions that exist, at least today, with respect to the areas that will accommodate our values, right? I think among the Republicans, in particular in the U.S., that make those particular states more attractive than many of the Democrat states. If not all of them.
These Republican places quite Islamophobic. So you've got the values, but then they're going to reject the Muslim, and yet the Democrats will embrace the Muslim, the values, and you kind of.
Right. But that's the issue, is that that Republican places, many people are Islamophobic, but not everyone is Islamophobic. And I think that what happens is that the media projections of that, and the pundits, the Republican pundits will make that seem to be the case, because I've dealt with many conservative Christians, right? And I never feel that they're Islamophobic at all. I think that what happens often is, in the mainstream media, a criticism of someone like Ilhan Omar, some legitimate criticism of her, and then all of a sudden it's labeled to be Islamophobic. And I said, well, that's not really Islamophobic. That's a legitimate criticism of her, right? So it's utilized, Islamophobia is utilized for political gain often. Right. And I think that because we have the type of Muslim politicians and activists in the country, that fundamentally this actually doesn't give a lot of these conservatives, or in particular evangelicals, good reason to give up their Islamophobia, right? In my viewpoint, because they were talking about after 9/11 how Muslims were a fifth column, right, in the West, trying to destroy America, trying to destroy the West. And then now we have these Muslim politicians who are, again, trying to normalize, of course, LGBTQ. They're trying to normalize abortion. They're in support of the violent BLM riots, and justifying violence and criminality by minority populations. And so why would I not think that this is what a Muslim politician or a Muslim government would do, right, to our society, right? Not to say that our society is perfect, was perfect prior to that, or continues to be perfect, but it's just, I think, that's just something, an idea that I think that most people don't really reflect upon, right? I definitely think that, that they're Islamophobic. If anything, put it like this, I like to say that the Republicans or the conservatives are really not, they're more, we call Muslim phobic, because I don't think that they know enough about Islam for them to actually be opposed to it. Because if those who actually come to know more about Islam come to appreciate it, right, and realize there's a lot of similarity between the religion and their own beliefs and practices, right? Yeah. But the left are not Islamophobic, where they're imanophobic, meaning, and iman is the word for faith. So they don't like people who are committed to their faith. Right?
I like that. You say imamophobic. Is that what you? Is this a term you coined, or can we all use it? Is this
I can't remember if I heard of someone or I coined it. I can't recall.
I'm sure you coined it. I think it's an excellent expression. If you don't mind, I'm going to might use it again myself. So because it's a nice distinction, because the left is typically very secular, very atheist, very humanistic, and very, inverted commas, progressive, and in many ways hostile to fundamental values held by traditional Christians and Jews and Muslims and others.
Right.
Yeah, God, it's quite depressing. But I like what you just said about America, because I completely fallen for the media stereotype here. You talked about the enormity of the United States, and there are different cultures and different kind of states within that. And so there is room for maneuver, perhaps, for a conscientious Muslim family who want to live in a better environment. You can do that. And I think maybe in a micro way that might just be possible in Europe. I don't know enough about the issue really to talk about that. But that's kind of a little bit hopeful. It's not just a default thing to Hijra. There is some maneuverability within the West, at least in the US anyway. That's very interesting. I think we might draw to a close now. I just want to say to viewers, by the way, Dr. Abdullah Ali was speaking about people being afraid to express unpopular opinions for fear of losing their jobs and so on. I've noticed I followed your Twitter feed for a while now, and I find that you express alternative views with subtlety and intelligence, and it's worth following. So what I'm basically saying is, folks, if you want to follow a really kind of nuanced and yet faithful ongoing discourse on whether it be BLM or race issue, particularly on these very sensitive issues as well, all LGBTQ issues, then Dr. Abdullah Ali's Twitter feed is worth following, actually, as a way of, I don't know, navigating through this and yet being faithful without having to completely self-censor. I don't get the impression you self-censor that much, but where you do express with nuance, and you're not being, you're not triggering people, I don't think.
Right. Yeah, it's all about. I'm all about nuance, and I think that's something that the world lacks right now. That people like things in black and white, but people need to think. People need to be awakened. They don't need to be woke. They need to be awakened. So, bit by bit, little by little, and hopefully we'll free some people. And of course, it doesn't mean that we're always correct. We're always right about what we post and the conclusions we reach. But it's at least let's learn to have conversations, right? Let's stop censoring one another because of disagreements. It's okay to disagree, right? We don't have to disagree violently. We don't have to shut one another down or cancel one another because we have a disagreement. We should be encouraging dialogue and the unity of the human race rather than further dividing people in the way that we've been doing it.
Well, that's absolutely. And another example of the nuance you brought to this, I watched, again, I've seen it before, a video which filmed you answering a question about so-called gay Muslims. And I like the way you distinguish between Muslims who are struggling with what I call same-sex desire, we're struggling with their sexuality and not denying what the religion is teaching, of course, on one hand. And on the other hand, those people, as you put it, who call themselves Muslims, who advocate for the normalization of the whole LGBTQ agenda. And is the latter case what one should be clear about not supporting and so on. But the first category of people who struggle should be welcome, should be given all the support and encouragement as Muslims, and not just be treated with respect. And I thought that was a nuanced, discerning dichotomy, which I personally don't always hear from Muslims. Put it that way.
Right. Well, I'm glad you heard it.
So folks, do look up that YouTube video on that. Dr. Ali was responding to a question from a member of the audience on this. I think the question was quite pro-LGBT. I got that impression, but the response you gave was, I thought, the correct one, and with the nuance in there. And it wasn't triggering or provocative. It was simply, this is what we believe. Respectfully, this is it. Take it or leave it. In closing then, Dr. Are you working on anything at the moment in terms of books or other work that you might want to flag up for people to look forward to in the future?
I'm always working on something. I recently re-released a very small work that I did for the purpose of explaining to non-Muslims the funeral rites of Muslims, why Muslims do what they do, called the Muslim Funeral Guide. A very small book. So if someone is interested in getting a copy of that, go through the Lamppost Education Initiative website, which is lamppostedu.org.
Right.
And also, we're very soon going to be publishing a work by Dr. Khalid Blankenship from Temple University which is a reader's guide to Islamic literature in English. And basically is a book which compiles a list of most, well, not most, but many of the books that Dr. Khalid himself has read throughout his life in English on the topic of Islam. And this particular volume is going to be focused on Quran and tafsir, Quran and exegesis. And so all those books, and so fundamentally, it's like an annotated bibliography where he lists the author's name, the title of the book, and then he goes and mentions the pros and cons of the book. So it might be a book that be useful for a person who may not know Arabic and they want to become more scholarly in English literature. So this book hopefully will be out within the next month. Of course, I'm always working on other things. And there's a work which is going to be released very soon through the Acton Institute. Written is a book on economics. It's not my book, but I wrote the introduction to it. The author's name is Ali Salman, and it's related to Islamic economics, and so I wrote the introduction to that as well. But outside of that, I'm constantly working on translations, updating my course material related to family law, inheritance, writing the original work related to Islamic commercial ethics. So yeah, there are a number of things I'm working on.
But about 6 months ago, I bought a book about by Ibn Taymiyyah defending the four imams, and I thought, great. And then I was looking up your biography again. I thought, hang on, this is your book. You translated this. This is your production. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. So, how, if I could just slight diversion, how come you translated that particular work by Ibn Taymiyyah, given all your other many varied interests? Well, what was the reason for translating that particular defense of the four imams?
Well, when I first translated that book, arguments among the Muslims about the permissibility or the impermissibility of following one of the four schools was a raging debate, right? So this was a very long time ago when I actually first translated that book. I never published it because I felt that the issue had died out, and so it was no longer relevant. But when I was approached by the publishers with regard to any particular works that I have that they might be interested in publishing, I just said, okay, well, I have this, and so I just took advantage of the opportunity to have it published. Even though I don't believe that many of the individuals who follow me are interested in reading things by Ibn Taymiyyah. But there are some, that some people are open to it. And the idea was that, okay, well, Ibn Taymiyyah, who is said to be one of the Salafi champions, or the champions of Salafism, he himself did not have problems with the four imams. He did not have a problem with following a madhab, a school of law. So the very person that you hold up as your champion actually doesn't agree with your perspective on this particular point. So that really is what it was about. It was about challenging a certain mindset that was widespread at the time.
An anti-madhab position. But what was it even saying? Wasn't he a Hanbali himself?
Yeah, it's Hanbali, exactly. It's Hanbali.
So I appreciate it. I was very pleasantly surprised to notice that you had done it. Well, thank you very much indeed, Dr. Abdullah Ali. It's been absolutely fascinating, actually, and thanks for that extraordinary narrative, or eschatological narrative, which helped to clarify things for me for sure. And then this sobering discussion of the times that we live in and what our options are, which I do appreciate. And I'll certainly mention this to my doctor friend to listen to what you said, because I think it's very important. So unless there's anything else you wanted to say in conclusion, sir?
No, just thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm going to continue to watch more videos on your channel, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing. And I just started listening to part 2 of Dr. Ali Atai's interview, but just thank you for the service that you're providing for humanity. Yeah.
Well, thank you. He speaks extremely in a private email to me. I won't embarrass you further, but he speaks extremely highly of you, put it that way, and recommended you, obviously. So that's That's wonderful. All right, so well, thank you very much for your time, and I'm sure the viewers have benefited enormously. And yeah, have a look at the comments as they come through in the coming days. You might see some.
Okay.
All
Will do.
right.
All right. Thank you.
Until next time.
All right.